Hey y'all, and welcome back to Legacies and Lattes with Portia and Shar. I'm your co-host, Portia Wood.
And I'm Charlene Berry.
And we are so excited to be here again with you this week to catch up on the tea or the latte, if you would like. Today, if you can notice our backgrounds, we're in person. We actually get to hang out together. We've been hanging out together all week. This is Shar's first time in Los Angeles. So how do you find it? How do you like it?
It has been absolutely amazing, Portia.
Yeah.
And thank you for being my tour guide, my knowledge of all things LA. It is not like how you guys see in the movies, okay? It's funny because, I've even, like, a couple of my friends, they're asking, how is it? LA in itself, it's beautiful. All of the different neighborhoods that you've been able to show me, all of the different locations, and it's on movies or on TVs, you just get to see a little snippet,
tiny little bit,
right?
Tiny little bit,
or what they want to show you. But
Sure.
the things that you don't get to see, the beauty of it, things that are changing or that has remained the same. And you've been in LA for how many years now?
My family's been in Los Angeles for a long time, ever since my grandmother was a kid. And we've been in, the Pasadena area for our family since like the late 50s, early 60s. So it's been, it's home, right? Even though we haven't always been here, like me, myself personally, it is home. So I love that part. It's just interesting for the work that we do, right, on legacy planning, to see the gentrification that's happened in the community and the impact of that change, right? What does that mean for the families that have been here? What does that mean for the families that are coming after? And what does that mean for the culture and sort of soul of a community?
Right.
So it's an interesting journey, but I'm glad you've gotten to see it. What was your favorite part?
Oh my goodness. I think my favorite part is listening to you tell your story and really talking about this used to be, we went past the old Pasadena Bridge and it's beautiful. It's a piece of artwork but then also it's negative side. Right?
It's got a little dirty history.
It's a dirty history, or even the Rose Bowl, like here in Pasadena, how that's been such a historical place. Concerts. And this weekend it was sold out for a Pokemon Go. Yeah. So it's interesting to see all of that, but to hear it through your eyes. And I know we have Dr. Marissa Long, who was also on the last podcast with us. We were able to hang out with her, and she's been here most of her life too. So as much as, and I think we all see that. I know I'm from Iowa. You go back home and things change, but it always will be home, right?
Yeah,
It'll always, as many changes as there is, as many gentrification, like you want to save your home, right? Like you're like, it's true. I know what it used to be like, what it could be, what the direction it's going into, but it's really amazing to be here and to see that and to experience.
You got to come hang out in the Dena. Yeah, you're talking about the Pasadena Bridge. So for those of you who are watching who don't know about this bridge, it is known as Suicide Bridge. And the reason is people would go there and they would jump off of it. So it is this incredibly beautiful piece of sort of city engineering that has now gotten these chain link fences sort of wrapped around all the different sides to try to keep people from jumping off this bridge. So when I was growing up, that's what it was known as, was sort of Suicide Bridge, despite it being this really, really incredible feat of civil engineering, just this really beautiful and iconic piece of Pasadena history that when you drive by it now, you're like, ugh.
How
like,
unfortunate.
Why?
No.
But it's true. And then you think about the Rose Bowl and all of the iterations that have existed in this sort of world famous Rose Bowl. And it was built in 1914, I believe, is when it was built. And so you've got all of over 100 years of history with this iconic thing. And then just this weekend, they had a Pokemon Go extravaganza all weekend long. And people are running around with their phones. Like, I don't even know how it works, but it's been a funny and interesting journey,
right?
Throughout the history of Pasadena, and this month is also Black History Month, and so we had the Black History Parade There's the Black Education Expo that we will be participating in. I'll actually be speaking there. Yay, turn up. But there's so much history, right. And Pasadena is spending a lot of time trying to deal with that history. Just last summer, they did a request for proposals. Did I ever tell you about the Freeway to Nowhere?
Yes, a little bit. Actually, a lot of it, but it's also good to bring up and talk and discuss about.
So there is a freeway in Pasadena, or a freeway in Los Angeles called the 710 Freeway, for those of you who don't know, who are not from LA. 710 Freeway was supposed to cut through Pasadena, and the state did, through eminent domain, took all of these homes through these different communities that they were going to put this freeway through, those communities being Black and brown communities. And they took the homes in anticipation of putting this freeway in. But the wealthier communities that were going to be near this freeway fought it. So even though the homes were taken from these other families, the wealthier communities fought it, and still fighting it to this day, where they finally announced that they're not going to do the 710 Freeway. They've scrapped this project after decades, because the eminent domain, the taking of these families' homes, happened in like the 50s, 60s. And so now the city of Pasadena is trying to figure out, what do they do with these homes? Because they took them from the families decades ago.
Right.
The freeway wasn't built, so they rented these homes back to other families as sort of low income, and have continued to make money off of them. And they wanted a study to say, well, what was the economic cost of this taking by the city?
Right.
And so they did this whole request for proposals over the summer. What they have decided to do, which is crazy to me, is they've decided that they're going to sell the homes at the 1960s rate to the city of Pasadena.
Oh, interesting.
Right.
I didn't know that.
The city of Pasadena is then going to sell the homes at market rate. They will then take the profits and put them in a trust to build affordable housing for families, so condos, essentially, as their way of trying to like make amends for this taking that happened. And I'm like, let me process this for a second. You're going to sell the homes, not try to find the families that the homes were stolen from, but you're going to take the homes and sell them to the city to sell them at market rate, which is millions of dollars now. Take the proceeds and build affordable housing, quote unquote, that doesn't have land, doesn't have the opportunity for economic growth, like all of the things that make home ownership powerful. And you're going to put them into affordable housing. None of that makes any sense.
None at all. None at all. And what about the families? So were any of the families that had lost their properties, their estates, their not living, but their homes, like, were they ever contacted? Were they ever?
Not that we know of, because you're talking about decades, right?
Right.
And so the request for proposals was about the economic cost. And it's really easy to do dollars and cents, right? You could talk about the taking that happened in the 60s and the 50s from eminent domain, and like what the property values were then compared to what they are now. And you can say that was the economic cost, right? That's dollars and cents. It's very clear and specific. But that doesn't take into account the socioeconomic cost of losing your home, right?
Your community,
exactly.
Where you go to church, where you raised your children, where they go to school, friendships.
But more than that, if I own a home that's on an acre of land in Pasadena, and it's next to where the mayor lives, that socioeconomic connection of having a direct line to the mayor, to the community members, is a huge loss when you no longer have that.
Right.
If I own a home that has an acre of land that I can build another home on, I can have an income stream. I can provide opportunities for other family members. I can leverage that property, because if I bought that property for $20,000, $30,000 and it goes up to $200,000, I can send my kids to college for free without any debt. right? Because I have this asset that appreciated over time that I can leverage. So you're talking about kids who have, if they were able to go to college at all, who have debt as a result of this taking. You have people who do not have that socioeconomic connection that they would have had they not been removed from their homes. You have people who could have had startup capital for businesses as a result of these homes that were then subsequently taken by the city of Pasadena. And not even to talk about where people went after that, because many people did not become homeowners again. So then they were permanent renters after this taking, and also corralled into communities that were then subsequently over-policed, which resulted into the war on drugs and over-incarceration of kids and grandkids. So now you have generational trauma that spawns from this taking of the state and the city of Pasadena.
Right.
And their response is, we're going to make all of the money, put it in trust, and then create affordable housing that really isn't actually affordable. And then we're going to sell it at market rate. It's crazy.
Sounds like welcome. A lawsuit. Sounds like a lawsuit waiting to happen.
Well, but how? Right? It goes back to that conversation around reparations, because the harm was so, quote unquote, so long ago. But my mom was alive then, right? She remembers when they started to take people's homes for the 710 freeway. Her friends, right, who lived in these different homes in our community, whose homes were taken and were displaced. Like these are real harms that happen today that most people don't even know existed, that have transformed communities. And the people who can afford the $1 million house today to buy back this property are not the people who lost it originally.
Right.
So, you see this whole transformational shift on community as a result of sort of government policies.
It's so interesting because, and we talked about it because as we were driving around and you were showing me, we have a very similar issue happening in Tampa, right? Where we have a part of the city called Ybor that's dominantly, it used to be Cuban cigars. Tampa was known for the cigars, right? And that entire strip used to be distributors of cigars, shops, things of that nature. And right next to it, they had built affordable housing. I'm not sure what the timeline was, but because there's so much development going on in Tampa. COVID, Tampa was open. People were coming in droves to move to the city. And a lot of
Florida's ratchet.
A lot of developers came in and put money in, and there was an entire Section 8 housing right next to this Ybor that it was, I think 100, 200 families that were pretty much bought out. The Section 8 housing was bought out by a developer to build, condos, gentrification, and do that. And all the families were given $1,000 to move. They were, hey, someone else has purchased this. You have to leave. You can't stay here anymore. So where do all of those 100 to 200 families go? Right? Where are you
going to go anywhere with $1,000?
Where are you going to go with that?
But this is the thing that we talked about before too. Guys, you don't know what you don't know. The law can be a shield, but the law is also a sword. Yeah. And what those families didn't know, do you know what I mean though? But they don't know that that they had tenants' rights.
Right.
Somebody told them something. Hey, we're going to give you $1,000. You got to get out. But you have tenants' rights. Cash for keys. People in California are getting tens of thousands of dollars for cash for keys to get out of their homes.
Wow.
Because they have rights, because they have a right to their home and they don't have to leave. But people get bullied by the law and don't have anyone to be their shield. And it goes back to this idea of having culturally competent representation and why it's so important. Because if somebody doesn't come in and say, hey, I know that these people are going to be taken advantage of, let me come in and help present this, then they're just going to be taken care of. And then where do they go?
Exactly.
Now they're gone.
Right.
Right. And it's not to say that development is bad. We need development. We need to keep moving forward. We need innovation, right? That is a part of expansion in our society. But we have to do it in a way where we're not completely destroying the people who can't protect themselves.
And it's involving the community with those conversations, right? It's not, hey, just the elected officials. Yes, we elected them, but did we? Did you do a door knocking campaign and let people know that this was going on?
No.
Come to a city council meeting, come to a development meeting. Like, how is this affecting you? And allowing people, public comment. I've sat in so many city council meetings where it's people don't know what they don't know. Exactly what you said. We're so used to being reactive to what happened instead of being proactive. And as a society and as the United States of America, we always do that. Like, it's after the fact, right? Well, if you would have had conversations before, this is impacting the school system. This is
100%.
impacting, the families, churches, businesses, how much, and that should really be researched in that study.
100%. I mean, when we think about it, right, and that brings us to sort of our next segment. So that's a really good segue. But community and local community involvement. But when we're looking at our homes and our communities and our neighborhoods and sort of the preservation of the souls of our community, it has to deal with activism. One, we have to educate ourselves. We have to know what's going on in our communities. And we have to have pieces in place that protect our assets. Most people don't have that part, right? The self part of, I have a trust for my home. We've got a will. We've got powers of attorney. We have legal implementations that are shields of our wealth for our community, because there are laws that are swords that are looking to strike down your wealth. So first things first is, do we have our own legal shields, right? And then the second thing is how actively are we engaging in the community outward to either soften the blows of the government swords, or to really bring in laws that are collaborative. And I think that's a really good place for us to pause for a second. And we'll head right over to this quick break, and then we'll be right back.
Stay tuned.
Hey guys, and welcome back to Legacy and Lattes with Portia and Shar. This last segment was great, talking about the importance of community and the soul of community and what it means to sort of do responsible development, right? Also, a little tidbit of the past. What has been some of the harms that our government has done in community that has shaped what we live with today? But Shar mentioned it last, and it was really all about local politics. Right? Getting involved. Wow. Did they do a door knocking campaign?
I have so many questions.
So many questions. But the real root of the problem is that most people are not actively involved in their local politics. And we think about the presidential politics, we think about federal politics, and everybody's got their eyes on it. And oh my God, they call it Sleepy Joe and the Giant Cheeto and whatever else they've got going on. And everybody's actively involved in what's going on in the executive. But really, the things that impact us as individuals is going to be what happens in our local city councils, what happens on our school boards, what happens in our state government, because those are the things that impact our homes, that impact our communities, that impact our schools, where our children go, that impact childcare, right? This is not a federal issue. These are state issues. These are local issues. These are people issues. Yeah. And so when we're thinking about the people issues, it really is, how involved are we on the local level? And you have some firsthand experience with this. So talk to us a little bit about your experience in politics.
Oh my goodness. So to be fully transparent with everyone, I grew up, obviously I've mentioned it before, in Iowa. We are the first caucus state, for the presidential election. In the state of Iowa, people will not vote for you if they have not met you or shook your hand and talked to you in person. That is how Iowa politics is.
That's how Iowa does it.
I grew up in a teeny tiny town, 3,000 people, 3 stoplights, and I think Obama came to our town before, he announced that he was running, at least 2 or 3 times.
Wow.
So to have that, and I know I was in undergrad 2018, 2019 before the 2020 election, so I got to meet Biden, Harris, and to see these people firsthand, to shake their hands, to ask them questions and be right in front. And it's like, it doesn't have to be the presidential. It's also your elected officials, your mayors, your city council people. These are the people that you should also be having, community discussions and engagement with. I loved it. I did love it, because when you get a sense of community and you feel so empowered that you're making a change in your own backyard.
Yep.
that's amazing.
Yep.
You firsthand say, oh my goodness, I'm a student here at the University of Northern Iowa. These are how these legislative, writings are affecting our school. We had a legislation specifically that was being passed in Iowa that was towards immigrants, that a police officer could pull over and ask someone of their status, right? And we knew ethically what the heck is going on, what the heck. But as
because
students,
that sounds like a policy that's going to get a whole lot of people harassed.
As students, we knew this is not where we need to be, putting our legislative work in. And we actually, a friend of mine created Dream Iowa, which was specifically helping, those who are undocumented gain DACA status, but then shifted towards legislation, right? Shifted to, we're in meetings with our senators. We're in meetings with our, House of Representatives and speaking to them and saying, how do you think this is affecting the rest of us? How do you think, and even reaching out to the community. Did you think?
Did you think is always the question I have. Did you think about what this actually does? Or were you just putting something in place?
Even bringing in people from the community. I remember sitting down with police officers that they're saying, we are already having hard issue, people giving us calls for domestic violence, domestic assault situations. Now, do you think people are going to think, hey, if I call, they're going to ask about my status, right? When really they care about our safety. So we even had community members that you wouldn't even think of that were backing our side, that were saying, no, these legislative, writings should not go forward because it affects how we do our work. So it connects back to Pasadena, right? It connects back to what was happening within your community, that if those conversations were had before they were able to pass that, can you imagine? Can you imagine what a difference that made? We were actually able to stop that legislation.
Yeah.
Because we were having those proactive, discussions.
But that's the power of community. That's the power of being actively involved in the local level. And there's so much distraction happening right now. I mean, I don't even know how many times I've seen something on social media about Donald Trump or about Joe Biden or Kamala Harris or something else going on in federal politics. And really what I want to see is what's going on in my local politics. Because for me, I need to understand what's happening in the school system here. I need to understand what's happening with the police departments here in terms of funding. I need to understand what's happening with the freeway to nowhere, right? And the takings that are happening in our community. There are things that impact our day-to-day lives that are only going to be about local politics. And most of us can't even speak to who is everyone on our city council. Many of us cannot name all of our city council members. Many of us cannot name all of our judges. And we vote for our judges, you guys. As a reminder, we vote for them. And they're the people who are going to if you get a parking ticket or you're going to get divorced, they're going to be the people sitting on the bench. Do you know?
Straight to jail.
Right. Straight to jail. Do not pass go. But do you know what they stand for?
Right.
Because I know people who walked in and said, oh, well, I came to vote for the president. There were all these other people and I didn't know who they were. So they just checked names that they thought sounded good.
Right.
There's a proposition that came into effect in 2020 for California specifically, and it relates to homeownership. And there was this, do you remember in the end of 2020, there were these huge wildfires in California. Everybody saw it, right? It was all over the news. Malibu was burning and, everybody was up in arms because Malibu was on fire. But, we had these huge wildfires. And so as a response to that, hey, people lost their homes. People lost their homes in communities that saw a whole lot of economic growth. And if they have to rebuild under our current laws, they're going to be reassessed on taxes. So how do we deal with that? How do we help the people who had no responsibility for the fact that their houses burned down, right? They're victims to wildfires. How do we adjust the legislation to make sure that they can still afford to live their homes once they rebuild them? Great. That seems really reasonable. They presented that proposition. The wildfire disaster relief, 55 and older, if you had to rebuild your home, you could keep your property taxes the same, or if you had to buy a new home as a result. What they didn't tell you, and this is the part where I'm like, did you think, or was this intentional? What they didn't tell you was that for that little tiny subset of people, 55 and older whose houses burned down in a wildfire who had to rebuild or, get a new home. The little tiny subset of people, maybe, 10,000 people. For all of Californians, they eliminated the one-time parent-to-child property tax reassessment exemption, which meant every Californian who inherited a home would get reassessed to current values. So our generation, us, the people who are coming up in the world, whose parents may be baby boomers or Gen Xers, who bought homes when they were super cheap.
They're like 30, 40K.
Girl, when they were like super cheap. In our office, we have clients that are like, yeah, we bought in Inglewood for like 10 grand and that house is now worth like $1 million. And their kids are about to get reassessed to $1 million values versus, the $10,000 property value that they should have had under the laws that we've had for the last, I don't know, several generations. You can see I'm very upset about this.
Yeah. But we all should be.
Right. We all should
California,
be. Oh, if you're in California, you definitely should be.
Should be.
But inside of that legislation was this like little secret, right? And so everybody knew what the headline was: wildfire disaster relief. And that's what was on the ballot. And that's what everybody knew until people walked in and they weren't informed.
The little asterisk at the bottom.
Right. They didn't read the little asterisk. And so they weren't informed. And they're like, oh yeah, that sounds like a good idea. Because like my local politics, that sounds fine. I wasn't paying attention. I was paying attention to the federal politics. I was paying attention to what was happening in the executive branch. And now people in California who voted for this proposition thinking that it was going to be a good thing for, these wildfires that we were coming off of, don't realize that they completely destroyed the value that should have been passed to their kids for their work on their homes. And now they have to get creative around what to do with their homes in terms of leaving it for their kids so that they can have value. Because most kids, particularly in communities of color, you talk about Inglewood, South Central, et cetera, don't have the economics to support $1 million home, the taxes on $1 million home. No. And there's a lot of systemic issues reasons for that. And, that's a whole different conversation, but they don't exist. And so if they can't pay, they're forced to sell. You want to know who supported this proposition? Can you guys guess who supported this proposition and put forward Prop 19 for California?
Who said?
Developers and real estate brokers. They were the ones who put a huge amount of money behind this campaign, which really feels like a misinformation campaign, right? They were hoping, and they were correct, that people were not paying attention to local politics, that they were so distracted by what was happening on the federal level that so much could be taken away in the local level.
Exactly.
And that's where we are today. And that's still what's happening.
Right.
We are so distracted by all of this conversation that's happening at the top that really has really small implications for our day-to-day lives, while all of this other stripping is happening at the bottom.
Exactly.
And it's really important. And I will say this again and again and again. It is so important to be actively engaged in what is happening on the local level. Because no matter where you are, there are judges who are being voted for who will determine legislation. Everything doesn't go to the Supreme Court, you guys. Most things don't go to the Supreme Court. Okay. The Supreme Court takes a very small amount of cases every single year, and even smaller, right? They also, most things aren't going to make it all the way up to the Court of Appeals in your jurisdiction. So it's the local judges who are generally going to be the ones who are the final determiners of what the laws are in your area. And you vote for them.
You have the ability to vote them in and out.
In and out. And once they're in, they can continue to be appointed to higher levels of the judiciary. And so if you're not paying attention to who they are at the bottom level, right? When they first come in, if you're not paying attention to what they do, you're giving them a platform to be able to rise to some of the highest ranks of the judiciary. And we don't know anything about what they stand for. And what we know when we look at the history, we look at eminent domain, like we talked about in the first segment of this podcast. We know that they can have implications of taking properties themselves away from families, changing legislation or ruling on Right now, the judges in California are ruling on 5 different cases that are saying that Prop 19 is illegal. And they're charging it. But the judges who we voted in on that same ballot are now the ones who are looking at whether or not that's true and making a determination. And how many of us know what they stand for?
Exactly.
So the local politics is really, I think, the highlight. Sorry, you said door knocking, and I was like, girl, yes.
But we were supposed to be, let's remember, taking it back, that we're supposed to be a system of checks and balances. And when it's not being done right, when our community is being negatively impacted, like, we got to check them. We're supposed to check them. I'm sorry, all these monies and corporations putting in, even developers, I'm sorry, your vote is the same vote as me. You can have all the money in the world, but one person, one vote, right? And so many people have worked hard for that, for all of our votes to be the same. And we're fortunate for that right now, right? How
on
many
the local
people
level.
On the local level.
Yeah.
Came and fought for that. And then also, to take it a step further, run for office. I've been telling this one for a while now, even if it's something, but the city council, Portia, like, you have been a resident here for how many years? Your family has so much history here and you have this voice of people that it is very difficult for people to be advocates. It is. And we are both very similar where we have that, right? We're able to, when we see an injustice, we speak out. And sometimes some people can't. Some people, it takes a lot for them, right?
Yeah.
But when we do have people that are in our corner, like Portia, like myself, we back them. We say, let's empower you to speak for us, right? You are our spokesperson for this certain issue because we believe in what you're saying. Like, we were never supposed to be a 2-party system.
No.
We were never supposed to be that. Go read the Federalist Papers. Go read all of that. Like, we were supposed to have multiple parties, multiple affiliations, multiple interests, so everyone's voice can be heard, and we've lost that. But in local politics, that's a bit easier.
Yeah.
That is, don't get jaded by what's happening at the top. Okay. Like, that has lost its, for a long, long time, has lost its, I don't even know what word I'm looking for there. But
natural minds.
Natural minds. But local politics, what's happening in your back? Are you going to the county commissioners, the city commissioners? What's happening? Yeah. When they're electing what school, even when they're bringing in new schools, right? We talked about the charter schools that are coming in and how they're selecting what students go and who has first dibs. Like, be a part of those conversations.
But that's the gentrification aspect, right?
Yeah.
We cannot talk about any of these things in a vacuum because each thing impacts the next thing, right? What happens in communities with gentrification impacts the school districts. People in Pasadena have been complaining about the school districts for generations, right? Ever since the schools were integrated, so many of the affluent white families that could removed their kids from the schools and moved them into private schools, right? And so there became this separate barrier that was created. And the property values were left to be depressed in many areas because there was a lack of sort of initiative, right? So there's an issue with local politics there. If people don't have the interest of the communities in mind because they're not represented, they're not going to get the funding and other things that they deserve that's going to push them forward progressively as a society. But then you have the issue of, well, values in California have gone up over and over and over and over again. And where property values in Pasadena, nothing's really under $1 million. So now you have all of these young families who are coming in from Hollywood and other places that are looking for land. And so they buy in Pasadena, but the schools suck.
Right.
But they're paying tens of thousands of dollars in property taxes, but they can't send their kids to the local schools. So how do you transform a school overnight?
Right.
No, seriously, people ask this question, but what you do is you come in and you say, hey, the local public school is failing. Right? We don't help it. We don't change it. We say it's failing. We reassign all the kids who are assigned to that public school to a different public school and we close it down. But we're not just going to get rid of the building, right? Because the facilities are still there. So what happens? The school district rents the facilities to a charter school. And all of a sudden, overnight, that school that was failing is a thriving top charter school for now the kids that are in that community. And the other kids who used to be assigned to that school are now assigned to some other public school that is still not getting the funding. And so what we have to remember is that these things happen not by accident, right? They are all interrelated. And so when we're looking at gentrification and we're looking at the fact that we saw the city come in and use eminent domain to take people out of communities and out of their homes. And then these transitions that they've been making, all of that is related back to what we allow our local politicians to do and how we empower them. Because if somebody's sitting on that school board and they say, I understand the history of how this works, they're never going to say, hey, we can rent this building back to a charter school. We need to fight for the kids that are in this community and keep the kids that are in this public school here. Or they have to get first priority on this charter school. But they can't be moved and bused to a whole nother school that still doesn't have funding while their original school building becomes a top tier charter school for other kids who are new to the community.
Right.
But that requires our involvement. And that's in communities all across the United States. It requires our involvement, whether you have kids or not, because one day you might want to have kids, and whether you fought for the schools now is going to be important for what it looks like later.
Preach.
All right, you guys, I think we're going to take a quick break.
Quick break, and then we have a couple of questions from some of our listeners today.
Yay!
So I'd love to get some of those questions answered for you all as soon as we get back from our break.
All right, thanks, guys.
All right, everyone. So we are back, and for our last segment, we have some listener questions that were coming in during this conversation regarding, local politics, things going on in our backyard. So I'd love to read them out and answer them.
Okay? Let's do it.
Cool. All right. So first question. Ooh, this is a really good one. How do you suggest navigating discussions with family and friends who may hold opposing political views, especially when trying to promote productive dialogue?
Honestly.
Just be honest.
I think honesty is listen. I have some family members. We do not all agree. We've been having really passionate discussions, particularly around the presidential election, particularly around then. And so we've been having really sort of robust conversations about what it means, because the reality is I personally don't believe that either of the frontrunner candidates are good options for me and for my beliefs and for what I want to see this country be and become, and for what I want the world to look like, to push forward for my 6-year-old and for him to grow up in. And so I don't like either of the front runners, which is problematic for me. And so, having conversations around, who are alternative candidates.
Right.
And I get a lot of pushback from the older generation that basically says, well, by voting for them, you're voting, you're throwing away your vote, which, I don't subscribe to the idea of I have to vote for the lesser of two evils. I don't think voting for evil is a good idea in general. But in having those conversations, I tend to like to come with facts. And I tend to like to support my position with receipts. And so for me,
she came correct.
I like to come with receipts. Okay. I'm like, let's have this conversation from that perspective. Yeah. And there are always two sides, right? Or three sides or four sides. Yeah. So, everybody should come with receipts. I encourage my family when we're having these kinds of discussions to make a plan around it.
Right.
We had our family meeting the other day, which was like a family dinner. We scheduled it. We had an agenda of what we were going to talk about. We gave people assignments in advance as to what we wanted them to look into, and then to have a collaborative conversation around what we wanted for our family going forward. It's not easy. It's not easy to have difficult conversations, but we can't shy away from them either.
No, absolutely not.
Because we can't stick our heads in the sand. So I would say just be honest, have your facts, not perspective, not emotions, but facts about why we're making certain decisions and what is most important. And I feel like that can be incredibly helpful when having these conversations.
And having an open mind sometimes too. Like everyone, even your family, you all think differently. You all come from different walks of life, and you all come from different professions. You see the world in different ways. And like we mentioned earlier, the system wasn't meant to be black or white, right? It wasn't. It's a little gray, yellow, green in between, but it's to have your opinion, have your receipts, have that, and then be able to listen to others and know at the end of the day, no one's wrong, right? No one's 100% wrong or 100% right. Like the truth is somewhere in the middle. But coming to the table with an open mind is how not saying that I necessarily agree with what other people say and take away from, but listening and being able to have those conversations, and at least starting the conversations.
I think it's important to lead with love and respect. If you love and respect your family, I think it's important to lead with love and respect.
Yeah.
And much of what you said, I really appreciate that. Right? Like it's not so blanketed in that way. And I think everybody has their hard sort of line, right? There's certain things that it's like, I just don't go past this.
Right.
And for me, it's like basic humanity.
Yep.
Right? Like we can have conversations about economic policy. We can have conversations about taxes. We can have all these different conversations about these other things that impact our lives. But at the baseline is like basic humanity, the right for people to be able to live and to exist and self-actualize is incredibly important for me. And so that's kind of where I always have hard lines. Is like when people are like, no, but they can't, then it's sort of like, this conversation might need to end. Let's table this and come back when we can be productive.
Okay, so next question. How do you suggest balancing political involvement with other personal and professional commitments in daily life? I can tell you, you will get wrapped in it, and you do have to be able to shut it on and off, right? When you're on, you're on. Speak your truth, speak your piece. You can get wrapped and involved. I took a break. And I had to accept that after the 2020 election. Like I had to take a step back. And I'm like, I did everything that I could do, brought my community, got people out to vote, did things of that nature, but also took a step back. There's a limit. There's also a limit, and understand that.
Yep.
But scheduling it in a way that you're giving what you can, but then also being able to say, all right, I've reached my maximum, right? But start small. Like you don't have to go full-fledged in and say, I'm going to start these door-knocking campaigns. Like start by even researching who's running, right? Yeah. Start by getting knowledgeable about your next election. Some people don't even know that there's more elections than just the presidential, that there's a midterm election, or that, people getting elected in a city council only run or only hold office for 2 years. And whenever that's up, that's when we revote, right? So start small and put your feet in and trickle your way in. And when it becomes too much, then take a step back. Then you're like, because you could do a whole deep dive. It's like those conspiracy things, right? Where you do a whole deep dive
that end up not being conspiracy theories. Right. But the USA Today back in November of 2023 reported that more Gen Zers are actually running for political office, and so we are seeing it. We are seeing it. Across the country, where younger people are actively participating in politics and utilizing platforms like social media to be able to talk about change and leverage their positions. There's never been a time in history where you don't need as much money, so much money to be able to actively campaign and get your message across.
Yep.
If you have a good message, social media has sort of democratized democracy.
Yep.
If you will. And that's incredibly powerful for people who really do want to advocate for change. There's also a lot of organizations that are available to help get, women, people of color, Gen Z, actively engaged in politics to help teach you how to run a campaign, because we don't have civics lessons in school anymore. And so this information doesn't get gatekept from the average American to be able to go in and actually actively engage in politics. So these things do exist, and they are out there for resources. How do you turn it off? I mean, boundaries, right? Like we talk about boundaries everywhere. We talk about boundaries in in the workplace. We talk about boundaries at home, talk about boundaries with our families, all of these things. It is the same thing. It is just about having appropriate boundaries and not letting it become over and consuming part of your life.
Because it will consume.
It will consume. There's an organization called GenZforChange.org. They're also they're a collective that's trying to get out information about politics. I am not personally familiar with them. I just Googled some resources for you guys. But their website talks about creating, spaces and opportunities for Gen Z to be able to get actively involved in politics. So I would say, look into it, because the studies show across the board that millennials, Gen Z, that we are not in for where the country is going. We are not in for the U.S. institutions. We have watched the banks fail. We have watched war after war after war. We've watched continued assaults in our schools. We've dealt with them, right? So like when I was in school, we had Columbine, and it's just continued to grow from there. And now as a parent of a kindergartner, my kid coming home talking about they're doing active shooter trainings in school. And so we're not on board for where this country is continuing to go. And we're not on board with corporations, recording record profits while paying nominal taxes, while we all are sitting here looking at $10 eggs in the grocery store and not getting paid any additional money on our salaries, right?
Yep.
The American people, the young American people, are not on board. And so if we want change, we got to be willing to put the work in to fight for it.
Yep, 1,000%. So in closing, final piece of advice or encouragement that you would offer to listeners who are taking their first steps into political engagement.
Ooh.
Do research is mine. Do research, look up people that are running. You got pamphlets of who's running here
every day.
Look them up. See what their, what their views are, what things that they have been involved in. See if you resonate with them. See if you don't. Question it, right? Yeah. Question yourself. Give them a phone call, or not them specifically, but their office, right? Yeah. Just start somewhere, even if it's small, even if it's having a conversation. That's my advice.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that. Start somewhere. Yep. The reality is that we cannot stick our head in the sands, and it is not all about who's running for president. Like, yes, that has impacts, but the biggest impacts you're going to feel in your daily life is going to come from your local elections. Make sure you know who the judges are, who the city supervisor is, who the state's attorney is, who's running for sheriff, right? Yep. Make sure you know who those people are, because in your town, in your corner of the world, right, of the country, of the world, of the state, that's going to have a huge impact on what your life looks like, right? On a daily in and out basis. So make sure you know who they are and understand and attend the city council meetings. If you've never been to a city council meeting, please go to the city council meetings, because they're voting on things like whether they should do tax hikes on your gas bill, or, whether a stoplight should go in. And that might not seem significant, but it can have huge impacts on your daily life. How the budget gets allocated for the schools in your area, and whether or not your school where your kids go is going to get resources or enough of the resources. So I would say, taking the time to get actively involved in your local politics and at least informed is going to be really the best thing that you can do. And everything else will sort of spawn from there, because you'll understand what's happening.
Yep. 1,000%. Preach.
Yeah.
Preach. Snaps for today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this candid conversation.
Candid conversation.
Candid, and so great being in person with you.
Yeah.
Best one yet.
So
more
fun
to come, but thank you all so much for being on with us on our podcast and on TikTok, and we are very excited to look forward to more candid conversations.
Yes, and cheers. We are protecting legacies one cup at a time.